They Raced Horses on Main Street by Anthony H. Coppola. Part 7. Or Part 5 in the book, but we're up to Part 7 in the video. The Fire King Engine Company. From the Douglas Herald newspapers of 1868. Fire. On Saturday afternoon, the agent of the Axe Company, Mr. Moore, discovered that the chimney of the stone mill in rear of the office was on fire and had communicated to the roof of the building. He immediately hastened to the spot and, with the assistance of the shop hands, succeeded in extinguishing it without a general alarm. The patent fire extinguisher was brought into use and did good service. The damage to the building was light. Almost a fire. The dwelling house of Miss Rebecca Legg on East Main Street caught fire on the roof by sparks from the chimney on Wednesday and was extinguished by the valiant members of the fire department after burning a hole about as large as a piece of board. Fire. A fire broke out in the Albee House on Albee Street in this town on Thursday afternoon, but was extinguished by the laborious use of water pails after burning a large hole through the roof. The building was owned by Moses Ferris, whose loss is estimated at about $50. More serious consequences would have been inevitable had not the assistance been rendered by Mr. A. F. Brown and a posse of carpenters who were at work on the former's premises. We trust that our citizens will not have to learn by sad experience that a fire engine is needed in this town. 12 years passed before the citizens and officials did indeed learn that Douglas was in need of a fire engine, and so in 1880 purchased a firefighting apparatus known as a hand tub. This piece of equipment proved to be cumbersome and required about 20 men, or several horses, to pull it to the scene of a fire. In the rear of the hand tub was a two-wheel attachment which carried a hose and was known as a hose reel. At the fire, at least 12 men manned the brakes, which were two strong wooden rods, one on each side of the engine, and with an up and down motion by the men pumped water from the nearest pond, river, or well into the fire. The proud firemen did not at all approve of the name Hand Tub for their first fire engine, and promptly changed it to that of Fire King. The Fire King had no sooner arrived in Douglas on June 25th of 1880, when in less than 2 weeks, on July 7th, 1880, it was put to a severe test, as described by the Woonsocket Patriot newspaper. Large fire in East Douglas. By far the greatest fire that ever occurred in Douglas took place on Wednesday evening, July 7th, 1880, at 9 o'clock, when the shoddy mill of Lee and Murdoch was running. The fire commenced in the mill where the carding was done. The building was of wood and about 30 square feet and 2 stories high. The force pump was started, and people ran up the main street crying fire. A new fire engine with 500 feet of new hose was promptly on the spot. The whole of the building was destroyed. The fire spread quickly to the new brick fireproof shoddy building, 1 story high, which was soon consumed. It then leveled the new engine house, 2 stories high, and built of brick. The flames before 10 o'clock had commenced on the large frame factory building, 100 by 40 feet and 4 stories high. This fine building, between 10 and 11 o'clock, gradually succumbed to the fiery element and went down with a large stock of rags, etc. The flames spread and swallowed up one tenement house nearby, used by 2 families. The new engine, called the Fire King, with 500 feet of new hose, under the direction of A. F. Jones, chief engineer, did good service in protecting the houses nearby. Our farmers have complained some of the last few months because our town has bought a new engine and hose, but it seems as though this gigantic fire, which inside of 2 hours changed $75,000 worth to ashes, will arouse our people to still better preparations for fires hereafter. A fire steamer might have saved this large factory building, worth $50,000. This first attempt by the Fire King to extinguish a blaze was very unsuccessful, to say the least. Despite its presence at the fire, flames destroyed a total of 5 buildings. The firemen quickly learned that their Fire King was all right in putting out a small fire, but not powerful enough to check a large one. They also found that the effectiveness of the Fire King was limited to the village and of no use whatsoever for buildings further out, or for farms in the outlying districts. So, Fire King or not, these people outside of the village still had to rely on a steady stream of water pails, the reason why farmhouses and barns were lost. The firehouse was built in 1882, with an upper floor which was called the Fire Hall, where meetings and small events took place. The firemen organized and named their force the Fire King Engine Company. On front of the building, a half-circle wooden plaque has on it the motto, Veni Vidi Vici. The Fire King Company started with 12 or so members in 1882, then increased to 38 members by 1886, to about 50 in 1905. These members were paid $8 each per year of service. Once a practical joker paid them off in pennies, and for some time after, the members were paid in gold coin. Items of the 1880s. The following officers of Fire King Engine Company have been chosen for the issuing year. Foreman E.P. Heath, First Assistant; George Cummings, Second Assistant; Edward Murphy, Secretary; Fred E. Marsh, Trustees; Honorable Logie, Arthur Sutton, John Hughes. The company now numbers 38 members and is in a first-rate condition. A highly successful exhibition of Warren's chemical fire extinguisher compound was given on the vacant lot near Lovett Pond Monday. It was witnessed by a goodly number of our citizens with the utmost satisfaction. H.S. Taft of Providence was the exhibitor. The Fire King Company will participate in the muster at Webster Friday. A trial was held Saturday evening. The Douglas Company has won many prizes and hopes to land one this time. The engine has been painted and put in excellent condition. A few years after the firehouse was built, the firemen began their social activities with a dance held in Firemen's Hall, music furnished by Balcom's Orchestra of Douglas. Shortly after this, a firemen's ball was held, which was an immediate success, and thereafter it became one of the highlights of each social season. The firemen's ball last week, Thursday evening, April 14, 1889, in Central Hall, was a highly successful affair and was largely attended. Music was furnished by the Social Orchestra of Whitensville, which gave an excellent concert from 8 to 9 o'clock. The Grand March, led by Mr. and Mrs. Francis F. Young, numbered about 60 couples. Supper was served at about 12 o'clock, and the best of order prevailed, and the occasion was greatly enjoyed. Fortunately for the town, most of the fires were minor ones, though some very serious. Upon discovering a blaze, the individual would run through the streets shouting, "Fire!" On one occasion, W. H. Condon, proprietor of the East Douglas Hotel, used a megaphone to warn the people. Whenever the bells of the Methodist and Congregational churches rang, and the whistles of the Hayward-Schuster Mill and the Axe Company sounded, a general fire alarm was in effect. Crowds of people, hundreds in number, would then flock to the scene of the fire and line the streets to watch the progress of the blaze. The Big Fire. March 13, 1904. Fire threatens to burn up the old town of Douglas. Central and Mechanics blocks and Methodist Church in ruin. Roofs on dwellings blaze and many families hurry to safety. Hayward and Schuster Department does much to fight conflagration. Special to the telegram. "Fire, fire," shouted Oliver Jones as he rushed along Main Street, alarming the residents of the flames which had engulfed the central block. In the meantime, the night watchman of the W. E. Hayward and W. S. Schuster Woolen Company saw the blaze and sounded the steam whistle on the mill. The whistle blast and the bells of the Methodist and Second Congregational churches awoke the whole town, calling not only the town fire department, but those who serve as emergency firemen at the Hayward and Schuster Mill, and also those at the Lovett shop of the American Axe and Tool Company. But everyone in town soon turned out. All three fire companies promptly responded. The American Axe and Tool Company had 2 lines of hose laid from its steam pump. The Fire King hand engine got out its apparatus quickly, and it was sent to the bridge over the Mumford River just opposite the Lovett shop. 1 line of hose was laid for this machine, and about 140 men manned the brakes and pumped until they had pumped out before they quit. But the salvation of the town depended upon 2 lines of hose 1,000 feet long laid from the mill of Hayward and Schuster Company. A. Knowles' force pump sent 750 gallons of water a minute through those 2 lines, with such force that they ripped the clapboards from the building. The fire had made such headway that nothing could be done to save the building. The fire, when it broke through the building, sounded like an explosion. The sides of the block fell in about 40 minutes after the fire was discovered. Shortly after the flames had reached the upper stories of Central Block, the roof of the Methodist Church caught fire, working its way under the spire, and before the roof caved in, the steeple toppled over onto the road. With the steeple came the great bell which had been used to call the people to worship for years. It was cast in Sheffield, England in 1869. The bell was badly cracked by the fall. When it was found impossible to save the church, efforts were made to save Mechanics' block, which was in the rear of the church. The block had caught fire, and after half of it was destroyed, the fire was under control, saving the other half of the building. Heat from the fire was great. Across the main street from Central Block, great elm trees in front of the Axe Company's office were badly burned, and 2 flagpoles were burned halfway off from the ground to their tops, 60 feet from the ground. Everyone had worked, rich and poor, side by side, most of them wet through, with clothes torn and faces blackened and bruised. The ladies were on hand with coffee and refreshments, and occasionally something stronger was indulged in, but the occasion seemed to justify the indulgence, as no one objected. The office of the New England Telegraphy Company was also destroyed, the station being in the burned Central Block building. A large force of men were immediately sent from Worcester in answer to telegrams, and soon had a gang of men at work who set up a new station and put it in working order at the drugstore of G. Stoddard. A new automatic exchange, the first in the state, had just been finished and had been working only 4 days. By this system, no central operator was necessary, calls being made and connections obtained by an automatic system controlled by pressing on a button by the party calling. This exchange was being carefully tried, and its destruction must have caused considerable expense to the company. By dark that night, all the 21 subscribers of the telephone company were in communication with the outside world. And so the fire that threatened to burn up the town of Douglas entirely wiped off the earth the 4-story Central Block in the Methodist Church. Mechanics Block was half destroyed, and many other buildings had close calls. It was the worst fire the town ever had. The origin of the fire was a matter of speculation, but believed to be incendiary. Deputy Sheriff Edwin P. Heath went to the work on the case immediately. He invited the assistance of Robert E. Molt of the District Police Deputy Fire Marshal. Central Block was the tallest building in town and had a frontage of 60 feet and was 100 feet in depth. The ground floor on the right side was occupied by C. J. Batcheller as a printing and publishing establishment. The store on the left side was occupied by J. W. Irving, who kept a general store called the People's Store. It was in this part of the building that the fire was discovered. The central hall, which had a seating capacity of about 600, was on the second floor. The floor of this hall had always been considered the best in this vicinity for dances. The Swedish Congregational Church occupied the third floor, as did several offices. Above there was a large banquet hall, able to seat 200 people. In 1 short hour, the Methodist Church, which had been standing for 32 years, and the Central Block, the social center of the community, were in ruins. Items and comments, 1904 to 1908. An alarm of fire was rung at 7:15 o'clock Wednesday evening, calling the firemen to a blaze at the old Hannett house just over the railroad tracks on Martin Road. The fire, which was on the roof of the building, was discovered by Charles Stearns, who drove to the village and gave the alarm. After some work, the fire was extinguished, damaging the roof. Douglas was well represented at the Oxford Fair Thursday and Friday. Friday, the Fire King Engine Company went in a body to compete in the old-fashioned fire tub contest, which took place in the afternoon. The boys did not prove to be the winners. 1906. Douglas has had more than the average allotment of fires for some time past, some of them bringing particularly sad results. Not only do the direct owners, but every real estate owner in the town feels the effect of them. There are many outlying farms in Douglas at the present time that have no fire insurance protection for the reason that no insurance company will take them, as the underwriters are continually growing more strict. The time will come, and may not be far off, when it will be impossible for an agent to take a risk on buildings of even good condition unless they be in the immediate vicinity of the village. Great care should be taken regarding fires, especially by those who live where it is impossible to obtain help when needed. The fire underwriters consider that Douglas has no fire protection and rate it accordingly. Something should be done to better the conditions, and it seems to be the general opinion that a chemical extinguisher should be purchased. The Fire King Engine Company had its 3rd annual turkey supper in Hotel Durham Wednesday night, January 19, 1906. Foreman J.B. Howard was toastmaster, and these guests replied to the toasts. Selectmen Winfield S. Schuster and Edward N. Jinks, Harry L. Albee, Arthur F. Jones, Fred A. Place, Herbert N. Logie, and fire engineers Deputy Sheriff Edwin P. Heath and Francis F. Young, former foreman. Each strongly voiced the sentiment that the town should have a system of waterworks, and spoke of the present inefficiency of the hand tub. Many members of the company joined in storytelling, and a vote of thanks was given to Joseph T. Durham. The hay barn, containing 40 tons of hay, on the 20-acre Thayer lot in Gilboa belonging to the estate of Andrew J. Thayer, was burned this morning. It is believed that the cause of fire was the dropping into the hay of a match or a cigarette by boys who, eluding the taker of the school census and the scrutiny of the truant officer, had resorted to the building to pass away their time at ease. A milkman passing on Gilboa Street, about 300 feet from the barn, saw the fire, and hurrying towards East Douglas, had the fire whistle at W. E. Hayward and Schuster Company's mill blown at 9:35. The hand tub belonging to the Fire King Engine Company was attached to a lumber wagon and hauled to the fire by horses of Henry Jarvis, and the fire was put out, but not until the barn and contents were ruined. The barn was built in 1899 of lumber taken from the Sprague estate, and it was 40 by 30 feet. Lower Village Axe Shops. At East Douglas, almost wiped out by fire Wednesday night, October 17, 1906. The fire broke out at 10 o'clock in the boiler house, which, with the tempering and grinding plant and coke sheds, are a total loss. The fire was discovered by watchman George Roberts, who at once sounded the alarm, and the Fire King Engine Company and the fire force of the W. E. Hayward woolen mills got to work. There are 6 hydrants in the Axe Company's yard that are supplied by a water wheel located in the boiler house, but when that fell, the hydrants were of no use. The Hayward mill hose of 600 feet had to be supplemented by hose from the Fire King. In half an hour after the fire began, the water main of Hayward Mills burst, and of course stopped that source of water supply. The Fire King hand engine with 40 men was the only appliance, but with the suction hose in a pond was the only reliance, and by relying men on the brakes they succeeded in checking the fire and saving the stone finishing shop. Of the working plant, everything else was destroyed. During the fire, great showers of cinders fell all over the lower village and kept the people busy in preventing the spread of the fire. The selectmen telephoned to the light company at Uxbridge to continue the street light current until 2:30 o'clock to assist in getting about town. Of the 150 men employed by the company, all but 30 in the finishing department will be thrown out of employment till the plant is rebuilt, which of course it will be, and these 30 men will have to quit before long for want of material on which to work. The fire is a calamity that emphasizes the need of a water system for the town. The firemen did almost superhuman work, but the system is antiquated and out of date. If there is to be no water system, then a steam fire engine should be procured. Steam does not weary, and it is cruel to require of men such severe continuous work as the Fire King boys endured during 2 hours. 1908. The firemen and other residents were kept busy Sunday fighting fire which broke out in the woods all around Douglas. The largest was the Douglas Woods, where about 1,000 acres were burned over. At Gilboa was another fire, and also on the west side of the old road to Uxbridge. The rear side of the 2-story house on Gilboa Street, owned by Mrs. Mary A. Thayer and occupied by the family of Patrick Hanlon, was burned by fire that started late this afternoon around the chimney of the house. Miss Hanlon told her son, Edward, who was just starting back to work in the mill of W. L. Hayward, to run to the works of the American Axe and Tool Company, 600 feet distance, and give the alarm, while she began getting out the furniture. The whistle at the axe works was blown 5 times at 12:30 o'clock. Soon the Schuster whistle at Gilboa and the Hayward whistle in the village were blowing, along with the ringing of the church bells and the abandoned Lovett mill of the Axe Company. The old Fire King, which everyone seems to ridicule lately, should receive a dose of oil at least every spring, as after a winter's rest it is liable to be stiff in the joints when it is called on. Friday it got as far as the lower village after considerable of an effort. 28 years before, in 1880, the citizens of Douglas boasted of their new hand tub, the finest firefighting apparatus available. They proudly called it the Fire King, and then the Fire King engine, but as each decade passed and the inability of the apparatus to stop a fire increased, the reference to the firefighting unit was not exactly kind, as the item above observes. Sadly, though, this new hand tub of the 1880s was reduced in name to the fire tub, and lastly, to the old hand tub.